Hello, my name is Robert Teester, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 36 years and a meditation teacher since 2001. This is a series of talks called The Cultivation of Wisdom on various aspects of modern psychology. And this specific talk today is on the psychology of mind and the five sense doors. So in this talk, we're actually examining the mind when we turn our awareness towards the mind and seeing what the mind is and how it functions, and in relation to the five sense doors, which I'll describe later. So let me describe the five senses first, and the first one is seeing with the eyes. Eyes see. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. So the first one is seeing with the eyes. Now when we say we're sleeping, we wake up, we open our eyes, and what comes in the eye door are just images and colors. There's no story yet. Just opening the eyes, and the eyes see color, form. That information goes into the brain, and it interprets those symbols, those images, those colors into some kind of story. We can close our eyes and the outside images stop, but then we just see the back of our eyelids. We open our eye, we could turn our head, say, to the right and open our eyes again, and then there's some other kinds of images and color and form. That information that comes from looking right goes to the brain, and the brain makes sense of that somehow. We can keep doing that to see, to isolate how the mind works. The mind gathers the information from the eye door, and it makes some kind of sense out of that, some kind of story. It can be neutral, it can be a threat, it can be pleasure, whatever, but it's just the eye door coming in, and the mind, and its job is to make sense of that input. You don't necessarily need to do anything about that. I'm just saying that this is a sense that we have as human beings coming in from the outside world, coming inward through the eye door. It comes to the mind, and the mind makes sense of that. It's the same thing with hearing. Hearing picks up sound. There's an eardrum in there, and it's a little membrane, and it picks up sound. But it sends it to the brain. It's connected to the brain. It's the brain that makes sense of that sound. We're not our ear any more than we are our eye. But these organs, functioning as they're intended, pick up, in this case hearing, sounds. And the mind makes up some kind of story about that. Tasting is the same way. We put something in our mouth, chew it, taste it, goes over the tongue with the taste buds. Touching is the next sense door, and we touch with our skin. We are very sensitive beings, and our skin picks up all sorts of senses, contacts the world through the sense door, and it sends a message to the mind, and the mind picks that up and makes some kind of sense of that. The sense of touch. Sense door is the faculty of smelling. So with our nose we smell, and that is connected to the brain. And the nose picks up smells, and it doesn't have a story. It's just a smell. The brain picks it up and discerns, enters in. The brain makes sense of that smell. So we have seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching are the 5 sense doors. Now those are the sense doors, and then the mind itself creates mind objects. And all these sense doors can be coming in at the same time, or using a couple of them at a particular time. If you're just woke up, you open your eyes mostly, and we see, and we're feeling too. Is it cold? So the mind discerns from that whole basket of sensations that's coming in, the different sense doors, and it makes up some kind of a story about all that. Now, it's important to understand and talk carefully about this, because those things that come in, we assume that that's us. We have an identification with these sense doors, and then how the mind picks up these senses, and it creates a story about who we are and what we're doing and where we're going and so forth. It creates a whole universe for us to live in. But is there anybody in there, in the way I've described it, that is us? That's me. Is there a particular organ that is me anywhere internally? Or is it just a series of organs and blood flowing, and in this case 5 sense doors, and then the mind making up a story? Is there an I in here? Which there isn't. There's no I. If it's all just sense information coming in the world, which one of those is me? Well, none of them are me. Am I my hearing? Am I what I see? For instance, if somebody loses their sight, they're still them. They just can't see. And that might cause some dismay, but then they adapt and go on. You know, you lose your hearing. Okay, you know, it's not the end. So it puts into question this whole idea of me and my and mine. Am I a product of my sense doors? We go out into the world, and you know, these images, all these things, we get flooded on the level of the sense doors. And we, of course, need these sense doors to function well. It helps us navigate, helps us keep us safe, and so forth. But is there necessarily an I in here? For instance, let's say at night we close our eyes to go to sleep. Well, we're still there, we're just sleeping, right? And sometimes we have images and dreams and so forth, and sometimes we just rest. And the point of sleeping is to rest so the body can heal physically from the wear and tear of the day. And there's lots of mind objects floating around in there from the course of the day. And oftentimes these things can come up in dreams, borrowing an image from the previous day or some kind of emotional items that get expressed symbolically, because the mind thinks in terms of symbols. So the symbols are floating around in the brain, and they might come out in a dream. And it could be just a normal dream, this images needing to complete somehow, or could be a bad dream. But I want you to think about, before you come into, say, your personality and your life and busyness, to contemplate this idea that there's these 5 sense doors, and you can't really stop them. So let's say, like, the whole world of advertising pivots on this, where you watch TV and they're selling you some kind of thing. And we get identified with that. Okay, well, I need to go out and buy that. But of course, if you're watching your mind and you say, oh yeah, I don't need to go out and buy that. It's just a sales pitch. But that's an example. But if we see something that we like or that we dislike, it's important to watch your likes and dislikes, because the mind picks it up and goes, I like that, and I dislike that, and the mind gets it's a little upsetting, or it's a little uneven, it gets agitated, it gets, the mind can get very disturbed. Or if we see something that we really like, we get up and, I have to go to the store and get that thing to be happy, make me happy. We seek pleasure. And when we also push away pain or anguish or emotional, like sadness and anger, whatever, we're drawn towards pleasant things, and unpleasant things get pushed somewhere. And we oftentimes push them internally, in different places in our body, and that's where it can stay there. So we try to, in development, psychological and spiritual development, try to develop virtues of equanimity, of avoiding the extreme states, where we don't deflate ourselves or inflate ourselves, that we stay there's a calmness to our ability of seeing these kinds of things that come in the sense doors and not get too attached to them. It's the attachment that causes the suffering, where we take it for real. But if you turn your mind back on itself, you see that these things that are coming in the sense doors maybe aren't so real. They're just a thought that gets formed in the mind. You could have heard something, and it goes in the mind, and the mind creates a whole story. You can get angry, you can overreact, you can get all pumped up, or you can feel depressed or sad, like, not so good. These are the inflated and the deflated states, and if you do your inner work to calm a lot of this agitation down and to move a lot of the contracted energy out of your body, you will be able to stay more in your center and more in an equanimity state of mind, equanimous state of mind where you're not so attached by these external forces, the mind can be calm too, and if you develop that part of you through a practice of some sort, like meditation, for instance, having a conversation with a mentor or spiritual guide or a therapist or someone that's helping you ground, then you will be less moved or pushed by external stimulus that's coming from the outside world through the sense doors. So you can stay calm in the middle of the swirling around. You don't have to be drawn out so much by these sense doors. When you go outside and go somewhere, your sense doors are flying all over the place. All this information is coming in. But you can lose yourself this way. And so let's say, for instance, if you learn how to meditate, you stay close to your breath, and when things are agitated around you, you come back to the breath as your anchor. Use your breath as your anchor, and a lot of the meditative practices use the breath as your anchor because you always have that. You can come back to that, rather than getting pulled out by advertisers basically yelling at you to go and buy this kind of thing. And we go shopping, and we end up spending a lot of our money on things that maybe we didn't even need. Material possessions are a seduction. What you really want to cultivate is your own center, and your own psychological, emotional, and spiritual practice to help you stay focused, stay in your own body, and not get pulled around by all this exterior hysteria of what the corporations want you to buy and what the politicians want you to do, and what your friends want, or your friendships and your mating ritual demands and so forth. You want to keep a center of who you are first. These other things of being a parent, or being a worker, being a social person in the mating domain, all these kinds of things are roles. It's like a coat we put on the coat. The mating ritual, we have a male will have a certain mating ritual set of behaviors, and the female will have a certain set herself, and those things are not necessarily the same thing. There's a basic lowest common denominator there in terms of procreation, but you want to clear up for yourself what your path is, and keep the most important thing the most important thing. Have your list where you have your goals, and you stay focused and clear. When you are exposed to the world through these sense doors, people get pushed and pulled all around through the sense doors, and the mind gets very stirred up, and it loses its calmness, it loses its equanimity. And so we get confused by that. We get so stirred up that confusion sets in, and we're not sure which direction to go in. If you listen to the advertisers, they're very clear. They want you to come in and buy a new car or whatever. So you have to catch your mind. It's at the level of mind that you catch that. It's at the level of mind that you catch this before you get pulled out. And if you get pulled out, then if you have your breath, or Some people have prayer beads. They count the beads. That's fine. That's good because they come back to the beads and they count them. 108 of them, kind of thing. All spiritual practices have some way of coming back, and if Christianity has prayer, and people get clearer with prayer. Some people have meditation. Some people just have periods of contemplation. Some people have quiet time. Some people have a cabin in the mountains, and they or they go hiking or go to the ocean. These are all ways of calming the mind back down, because the world of modernity is an agitated place for human beings when everybody's shouting at you to do something that they want you to do. You need to come back to your center. If you don't have a center, you're going to be in a state of confusion. And confusion is a very unpleasant form of suffering. Confusion is spending your whole life, in a sense, running around in a circle. So you want to have periods, because you're going to get confused. You can't stop that per se, but you can minimize it. So let's say you, out in the world, you're shopping, and come back to the mall. Well, see all kinds of things in there, and then you eat something there, and then all this socializing goes on. So, but then you also, let's say, come home and you might have a meditation practice, and you sit and you watch your breath, and the mind calms down. And so there's a period, where you become clearer and more focused and grounded, interspaced with the periods of confusion or uncertainty or unpleasant sensations or what have you. So that there are, in the thread of life, there are periods where you are getting concentrated, through watching the breath and getting clear and getting focused and feeling equanimous, balanced, centered, and where you have a place where you can heal. So a lot of the confusion results from these sense doors, because we get flooded from the outside world coming in, and we're just taken away. It's like a wave that comes in, sweeps us off our feet. And we're sloshing, it's almost like we're sloshing around the ocean and getting hit by waves. But in this kind of thing, the waves can come in any direction. Usually in the ocean it's coming from out at sea. But the way the sense doors work, I can hear something behind me, and turn around. And so these sense doors are picking up, from all different kinds of directions. If you see them just as a door and not you, that's the most important thing I want you to take away from this talk, is that those things that come in those sense doors isn't you. The one that's in there breathing is you. So you're a human being, and you want to have a way of making contact with you, independent of all this chaos around you. And you can't keep that all the time. Don't try to, nail that down. It's not like that. It's an awareness practice of returning to the breath, or returning to, contemplation or quiet time, whatever it is that you do. But you definitely want to strengthen that. You could meditate, say, in the morning for 30 minutes, and then at nighttime 30 minutes. You can increase it. And then if your practice gets stronger that way, you might increase it to 40 minutes in the morning and 40 in the evening. Or later, as many senior meditation students do, is they'll sit for an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening, and then go on meditation retreats And let me mention about what meditation retreats will help you with is they will give you 10 days of quiet time to where you're pulling in internally and watching the mind and staying with the breath. And it will calm you down, and you will be very different at the end of those 10 days, say. What you want to work to, you can learn meditation, go to a class for a day or an hour or a couple hours, getting the techniques and so forth. And there might be a 1 or 2 day retreat, and you want to go to that. So, it's not easy to sit and watch your breath. It's all kinds of things come up. So you want to, do a gradual learning period of learning how to calm down. And then eventually you want to build your practice up where you can actually go to a 10-day retreat, and that you can, stay with that and stay the whole 10 days until you're, till the end of the retreat, and then you go home. And then you can contrast yourself, from the retreat and the state of mind you have to the home life, to your workaday world that you live in, and if you have a mate, or if you have children, you can do a contrast and compare with those two levels. It isn't a choice of one or the other. You can have a thing called daily life practice, where you're practicing along the path. So where you go out into the outside world and you work, you make some money, you have a mate, and you have children, and you have a social life, and you have a spiritual practice, or you have a way of, working on the inner world. Because it's not mutually exclusive. You can do it all at the same time in a way, like in a daily life kind of way. You don't have to just go off on it to the monastery. But it helps to have a therapist or a teacher in your life, somebody guiding you, so that it's not so difficult and you get some feedback. Because the internal path can at times very difficult, and you really do need a support system to help you when you need to have some guidance. Teachers can point something out to you very easily, and it can just change everything for you, and I've certainly had that experience myself. Don't feel like you need to do it all by yourself. This is a real error in thinking in the world of modernity. Everybody seems to think that they have to do all this themselves. You don't have to write the Bible again, you know what I mean? You don't have to become the Buddha. You can go to somebody who's enlightened. You can go to a meditation teacher and ask them. They're very sincere people. They will try to help you. They will not harm you. A meditation teacher won't do that. There are sorcerers out there. There are very clever people that will manipulate you, but a meditation teacher won't do that. They're not going to try to take your power, in other words, but sorcerers do try to steal your power. But those are not sincere meditation teachers. Those are people that are desperately trying to get something, some kind of power from you. So you don't want somebody like that who's taking from you. You want somebody who gives you good information, and you apply it yourself, and then you can tell yourself if it works for you or not. Trust your own inner, intuition that will help guide you. If you go on, let's say, a meditation retreat, you'll see in time, and if it's a 10-day retreat, you'll see in time, when 3 or 4 days go by, that these sense doors are just flying open and shutting all the time, and they don't have any meaning. It's just sound at the ear level. It's just sound. It's just images coming in the eye door. You don't have to do anything about any of that. You just have to stay with your breath. The mind objects that come tells you to get up and go leave the retreat and go paint or whatever. Don't do that. Stay. See what else, because that's going to change. It's all impermanent. So whatever comes during your meditation, just keep sitting. It's unfolding and it's moving and it's changing and it's impermanent. All of it. All of it. So that's a nugget of wisdom that we need to cultivate and remember. And sometimes we need to get reminded by those around us that have wisdom that it's all impermanent and it's all changing, it's all moving. It's always doing that, by the way. We freeze it in our mind and we have a thought that comes up and we make this plan, like, well, we're supposed to do this by this age and make this much money and all that. But that's not real. That's just a thought. It's always moving, always changing, always will. Every breath that you take is a new breath. You've never taken two breaths that are the same. Every breath is unique. It's like a snowflake. It's not like the one you just had. This new one's coming in. You've never had the same day twice. You've never done anything twice exactly the same. It's always unfolding in this moment. It's always new. And you can cultivate letting go of all of it. A continual practice of letting go. So all of these plans that you come up with, planning, and running all around, you don't need to do that. And it creates a self, like, oh, this is me, and I've written down this plan and I'm going to stick to it. It won't work out like that. It's best if you're in this moment fully, and then that one leaves, and then now this next moment. It's like I'm on my in-breath now, and now I'm on my out-breath. You see, I couldn't hang on to my in-breath any more than I can hang on to my out-breath. I can't hang on to my beating heart. You know, I like that beat. No, there's not, you can't hang on to these things. You can't hang on to these thoughts. You can't hang on to these images that you see. You see a pleasant rainbow. You can't hang on to that rainbow. There's a memory of the rainbow, and then you go searching for rainbows. Rainbows happen by themselves, you see. It comes and it goes. It's all impermanent. All these thoughts in your mind are all impermanent. And if you let go of this thought, the next breath there's another one that comes up. And you're in this moment, you see, to receive it. So it's not like you're trying to get rid of the sense doors. It's more that you just see them for what they are. The eyes see color and form. And we then judge that, like, oh, I like that form. I like the color. Or I dislike, this water that's falling from the sky, or the cold weather. The likes and dislikes are just illusions, temporary illusions. The next moment's going to change. It could get worse, it could get better, but it's not staying the same. It only reinforces when we get real identified with all of our sense doors and the thoughts resulting from them. It forms a real strong sense of self. And if you let go, especially if there's some kind of spiritual practice, then you're letting go more. And so there's more equanimity. Like you don't identify with this self as strongly. It's just passing phenomenon. And that will give you more equanimity, and it will help you to see that not to pursue pleasure and pleasant anything any more than you push away the unpleasant. It's just the mind coming up with, well, a label and sticks on there and say that's unpleasant. Why don't you just receive the whole thing? The yin and the yang of it. Stop pushing away the unpleasant and stop chasing after the pleasant. Because this dichotomy, this dichotomous thinking, creates an imbalanced mind, and it upsets you people. It's a continual creation of a storm. And it causes suffering fundamentally, and that's the point of the talk, is that we need to stop chasing our own tail around and come back to this breath in this moment, and it's okay. It's all okay. You can let it go. You don't need any of it. It's pretty basic what you need. So don't build up the thought, the empire in your mind about the castle you're going to own and all these things. Material possessions will not take that suffering away. It will create more suffering. Try to keep life simple so that you're not chasing your own tail. So you don't need the next year's model new car. You'll be fine. Just what you have. Corporations are very clever. They spend billions every year to convince you to buy, whatever products that they're selling, and it agitates the mind. So protect yourself from the corporations, particularly also the political arms of government, continually telling you what to do and who to vote for and so forth. But to be true to yourself first, so you can discern. You're better able to discern, these outside forces and see which ones align themselves with, your true self, your sincere self. So that's where you have to turn it back to watching the mind itself. That's the key. And if you say learn how to meditate, which I encourage people to do, learning how to meditate will help you a lot to get to the level of doing a 10-day retreat. And then once you do one, then you might want to do another one, hopefully, and then learning how to do that as often as you need to, so that you have some balance, so you have a relationship with your interiority, with your interior self, and you ground in that, so that when you ground in your own interior self, you're much more solid. You won't get pushed and pulled around. There's a metaphor I like to use. I think about it like that a sailboat has this big sail, and the winds come around and it blows, and if it doesn't, and the sailboat goes one direction because it's blowing in that direction. And then sometimes the wind stops blowing and the sailboat stops going anywhere. But when it's blowing, now there is a keel underneath on the bottom of a sailboat. It isn't really a floating boat. It's a heavy thing because the keel is made of lead, and it's got, I don't know how many pounds, but it's filled with lead. So when the winds blow it, it doesn't just blow over. It's got that keel on there, and that's what pushes it through the water. It's cutting through the water underneath. And you can then adjust your sails to go in a direction. But the keel is what's holding it from tipping over. Well, if you have a keel, see, if you've got sense doors and you don't have any kind of spiritual practice or any kind of psychological or emotional work that you're doing on yourself, you're going to get blown by these various winds that come in these sense doors. But if you have a keel, you know, a real grounded sense of who you are, like doing inner work, that's important. That will give you that keel. And you can deepen the keel as deep as you want. And a 10-day meditation retreat will really help you with that. And there's longer retreats too. The Buddha would go on would have a 90-day retreat each year during the rains retreat. And so, you know, he taught for 9 months, and then 3 months would be on retreat. So you can, you know, the meditation centers try to get to that place of having a 90-day course, but sometimes they're not that well funded and so forth, so they might have a 30-day retreat, or 6 weeks, 2 months, something like that. So you want to have some way. If you're in the Christian tradition, there are retreats there too. But pick one that serves you and will help you deepen. It isn't about socializing per se. It's nice to have some friends in spiritual practices, but it's also real helpful to be able to ground, you know, in contemplation. So you want to have more of that side of things. You know, you're either a therapist, a spiritual guide, a life coach, somebody that's helping you to stay in your own body and stay clear and focused. And then you can have a lot of other things, you know, including a job and a mate and children and that kind of thing. But you sort of need both. You know, I mean, it's in modernity, people are getting pulled too far out of themselves all the time and being controlled by the multinational corporations and politicians and so forth. And so that's why it's important to have a counterweight on the other side, to where you stay with yourself and you develop and you stay grounded. So that's why we want to turn the mind back on itself. We want to see the ephemeral nature of the sense doors and how it works on a physiological level. The sense doors pick up something, and the mind, and it ends up in the mind. You know, that's where the computer is. The mind picks this stuff up and makes up a story. And then we can also let that go. Okay, that's not real. That's not me. And I'll just stay here and breathe. So the point of the talk is to help people understand that. It's that you know, where the mind is just this function that makes up this story from the sense doors. You don't have to run out and do any of it. You know, it's just like, oh, that's just the mind making up the story. It's not you, and it isn't some direction for you to go in. You can stay present without it. So you let it go. So you learn how to let go. Let go of it. Just let go of it. Just let go. Stay with this breath. In, out, in, like that. And you'll deepen your keel. You'll deepen your own self, and you won't get so blown around and filled with anxiety or getting depressed and all the other stuff that goes on in the chaos of your world. So think about what I'm saying, and you can check out my channel on YouTube, the Cultivation of Wisdom. I have a series of talks that I have in that channel, and this is a talk on the psychology of mind and the 5 sense doors. So once again, my name is Robert Teester, and I would invite you to contemplate learning how to do some kind of spiritual practice and deepen that. I encourage people to meditate because it's the quickest way to develop in that sense. But choose what works for you. If you like the Native American Hopi, or, you know, they have good. They've cultivated wisdom themselves. So there's a lot of different spiritual practices, but find the one that serves you. Find the one that works for you. And if you try one, and it doesn't work for you, and find another one. Just start experimenting. Different teachers, different talks that people offer. Find the one that works for you, and if you find somebody that really you can really hear and really get help by, then make contact and have a helper. So I wish you well, and I hope it all works out for you. And if you'd like to make contact with me, then just check me out on the YouTube channel, The Cultivation of Wisdom. Thank you.